I buy a lot of cars, and nearly all of these vehicles are cheap, below market value cars, which means that not only am I buying cheap cars, but I'm also buying these cheap cars at a discount. For example, this month alone, I purchased a 2011 Mazda 3, a 2013 Lexus, and a 2011 Toyota Yaris, all of which were purchased for between 20 and 30% below market value. And I get asked all the time how I'm able to do this. And so in today's video, I'm going to be breaking down not only my best tips and tricks for how I'm able to find these below market value cars, but I'm also going to be diving into some of my tactics for negotiating on these. That way I can get the best price possible. So let's get started. Just recently here on my channel, I made a video walking you through the exact step-by-step process that I take in order to not only do market research, but how I'm able to actually find the cars that I buy. And so in this video, I don't actually want to go through my step-by-step process. If you want to check out that video, I will include a link down in the description below. Instead, I want to talk about some of my best tips and tricks that I think are a huge playing factor as to why I'm able to get these stellar deals. And with that, my very first tip is to pay cash. Paying cash is one of the best ways to get the best deal on a vehicle. The reality is below market value deals aren't found at dealerships, they're not found through financing cars, and for the most part, you do have to pay cash in order to find them. Now, that's not to say that going to a dealership means that you're automatically going to be overpaying for a car, because that's not necessarily true either. But in general, whenever it comes to below market value deals, many of these are done in cash. This is because you're able to negotiate and do the deal faster. You're not relying on slow banks and paperwork to dictate which cars you can or can't buy. And oftentimes the cheapest cars aren't really eligible for financing anyway, so that means that if you are financing a vehicle, you're probably going to have to get a higher tier car. And these are typically the ones that don't have huge discounts. Paying cash is definitely one of the reasons why I'm able to buy such good deals on cars, because I'm not being bogged down by banks, I'm not being limited by my selections, and I truly can choose the cars that are right for my fleet and the ones that I deem to be good buys. Number 2 is timing. Over the years, I've found that a great way to get a really good deal on a car is having a sense of urgency behind that purchase. If somebody has listed a car for sale, they want to sell that car, and the idea of selling that car today is an attractive thought. So what I do whenever I buy cars is I always say, hey, would you take blank amount of money in cash? I will come today. For example, as I'm recording this video, just this morning, we purchased a 2011 Toyota Yaris for $6,250. This is a car that has a market value of about $7,500 to $8,000. And the car was listed for $7,000, so it was already listed below market. I messaged the seller of this car. I said, hey, would you take $6,000? I can come right now. He messaged me back and said that he couldn't take $6,000, but he could take $6,500. I said, sure, that works. So HP and our employee left to go pick up the car, and we purchased it about 2 hours later. And we're able to knock off an additional $250 off the purchase price, making the total purchase price of that car $6,250, well below market value. This happens all the time where a seller will want to sell a car and I tell them, hey, I can come today with cash, and they are incentivized to make that deal happen because they know that if they pass on me, they don't know when another person's going to come around wanting to buy that same car. Whenever you message a seller and you're going through the negotiating process, always tell them that you can pick up either today or tomorrow. Tell them that you have cash in hand, give them the price that you're willing to pay, and tell them exactly when you can come pick it up. I have found that this combination works extremely well, and you would be surprised at how often sellers will agree to sell their car at a lower price simply because they just want it gone ASAP. Being available to pick up the car as soon as possible is a valuable asset, so make sure to use it to your benefit. Typically, I won't even engage with sellers unless I know that I'm able to pick up the car within 24 hours because I know that that's a huge advantage for me. Number 3 is always negotiate on a deal. Now, this may come off as a no-brainer, but negotiating is so incredibly important, even with these cheap cars, even if you feel as though you're already getting a great deal on a vehicle. Again, you'll be surprised at how far you can go with negotiating if you have a desperate enough seller. Whenever I buy a car, there's typically 2 levels of negotiating. You have the negotiating with the seller that you're doing over Facebook Messenger before you actually go look at the car in person. That's going to be based off of information from the photos that they provide, the vehicle listing, as well as the Carfax. And based off of this data, you should be able to negotiate at least a few $100 off of the purchase price of the car. But then whenever you go and view the car in person, even if you've already agreed on a selling price, it doesn't mean that you can't negotiate more. For example, the Toyota Yaris that I mentioned earlier, I negotiated $500 off the purchase price of that car via Facebook Messenger, and then whenever HP went to go view the car in person, he negotiated another $250. This additional $250 was based on the fact that the car needed new tires, which is something that wasn't disclosed in the vehicle listing. You need to be able to look at a vehicle and be able to tell what needs to be fixed, repaired, or what simply doesn't meet your expectations, and use those points in order to negotiate off of. For example, if we go into a car and we see that the brakes are squeaky or the suspension is making noise or the interior is much dirtier than anticipated, we will use all of these different reasons as a way to get the price lowered, and it oftentimes works. I don't care if you're getting the best deal in the world, always negotiate and always try to lower the purchase price. Sure, this doesn't work all the time, but you'd be surprised at how often the seller is willing to come down on price, even just a few $100s. On that same topic is knowing what types of cars and damage and wear and tear is okay for your vehicle versus which ones should be avoided. One of the reasons why we're able to get such great deals on cars is because we buy cars that oftentimes need a little bit of work. If you're buying below market value vehicles, chances are these cars are not going to be perfect. In fact, I would say that of the dozens of cars that I've purchased over the years, very few of them have needed absolutely no work after the point of purchase before we list these cars on Turo. Some cars have needed major work where we've actually had to do a full rebuild on the vehicles, but others have just needed minor things here and there. One thing that HP and I always do whenever we go to purchase a car is we'll look at the vehicle, and as we're test driving it, I'll keep notes of what needs to be repaired or replaced on that car, and we'll add up the total amount that that's going to cost. For example, last month, HP and I looked at a 2011 Ford Focus, and we noticed that the center console of this car was cracked. This is something that on the surface looked as though it could have been a deal breaker because the center console crack was pretty bad. But a quick Google search led us to an eBay replacement that was identical to the one that was in the vehicle, and it was only $100. If we didn't know any better, we may have passed on this Ford Focus simply because of the crack in the center console. But because we've done this so many times over, we know that we can do this research on the test drive, and we can determine whether these small damages and imperfections are worth fixing, or if it's worth passing on the car altogether. And the thing is, this applies to a wide variety of different types of damage and wear and tear that can occur on cars, especially whenever you're looking at below market value cars. You'll find more often than not, these cars do need some types of work. So knowing how much this work is going to cost, what's it going to entail in order to address it, and then incorporating that into the purchase price of the vehicle is a great way for you to get some steep discounts on the cars that you're looking to buy. And sometimes you will come across cars that simply have too much work, and because of that, the cars aren't worth buying. But I believe that you'll be surprised to see how many cars have very minor repairs that are very easy to fix that ultimately can lead to you getting hundreds of dollars off the purchase price. And so as you go through and you're doing your test drive, make sure to do your research and figure out what repairs need to be done to the car and whether or not those repairs are worth you doing and how those can be incorporated into the negotiations for that car. The more repairs that are needed, the more aggressive that you should be with negotiations. Number 5 is Facebook Marketplace. I consistently get asked what my favorite platforms are for looking at and buying cars, and Facebook Marketplace is hands down my favorite one. I used to use Craigslist quite a lot, but over the years, it's definitely gone downhill, and now Facebook is what I exclusively use. Facebook has a large selection, people are pretty responsive, and the fact that you can message sellers directly on the platform is a huge plus. They also have really great filters so that you don't have to sift through hundreds, if not thousands of vehicles that don't apply to your search. If you aren't utilizing Facebook as a way to find below market value deals, you are absolutely 100% missing out on them. I promise if you look at Facebook Marketplace consistently for a couple of weeks, you will find a solid deal. So definitely give that a try. Next up is don't underestimate a desperate seller. This is actually related to a comment that I received on one of my most recent videos where somebody basically said that he didn't believe that I was buying cars for the prices that I say that I'm buying them for. And this comment was something along the lines of, why would somebody give away a car for free by selling it for under $5,000? But the truth is, if somebody needs money, they are willing to sell a car for virtually any price, even if it's well below what that car is worth. For example, the Mazda 3 that we bought really recently for $4,700 was purchased from a small dealership, and the owner of that dealership was definitely desperate to sell some cars that weekend. He had told us multiple times during the test drive that he needed to offload cars, and it was obvious that he seemed to be a bit tight on cash. So whenever we offered him $4,700, he took it. We've also bought a handful of cars over the years from people who upgraded their car, and as a result, they needed to sell their old ones. In fact, this year alone, we've purchased 3 Ford Focuses from people who had recently upgraded to a Tesla, and their wives were simply tired of seeing their old Ford Focuses sitting in the driveway. So they sold it to the first person who would basically come and get it. I have found that the best types of sellers to buy from are the people that either need money and thus they're desperate to sell, or they're the people that don't need money at all and they just want to get rid of the eyesore that's sitting in front of their house. And you would be surprised at how cheap these types of people are willing to let cars go for. This is where patience comes into play because not everybody is this type of seller. You're going to find those greedy sellers that are asking an astronomical price for their car. You're going to find those well-educated sellers who know what their car is worth and they're not willing to sell it for less. But you will absolutely stumble upon the desperate seller or the naive seller. And once you find these types of sellers, it's your time to jump on the deal and go buy that car for a below market value price. These are the types of deals where you can walk away with a car for 20 to 30% below market value, and they are absolutely more common than you would think. You just need to be able to identify them and jump on the deal when they come across your desk. One of the most important factors of finding below market value deals is knowing when to walk away from these deals if they just simply aren't worth your time, energy, money, and effort. I get asked all the time how we're able to find so many below market value deals, and I believe that the reason why I get asked this so often is because between YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram, it looks as though HP and I are buying cars all of the time. And sure, we buy a lot of cars. At this rate, we've been buying about 2 per month. But what you guys don't see is what happens behind the scenes. You guys never see the cars that we look at and don't end up buying. You never see the Facebook messages that I send on a daily basis to sellers who aren't interested in bringing down the price of their car. And you definitely don't see the hundreds of duds that we sift through in order to find those great deals. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes in order to get a fleet of high-quality, cheap cars. And that's something that's never shown on social media. Truthfully, because it's boring and it wouldn't really make for good content. But it is something that's important for you to keep in mind whenever you're looking to buy cars for yourself. If you're somebody who's looking to grow a fleet or even just buy a reliable, cheap car, you're going to come across a bunch of different vehicles that simply aren't worth buying. But the thing is, you only need to come across one that's worth buying, and then it makes all of your time worth it. And whenever you find these cars that aren't worth buying, you need to be able to know when to walk away. One thing that I'm a huge believer in is having a price that you're willing to pay for a car and absolutely not under any circumstances going above that. For example, just a couple of weeks ago, HP and I went to go look at a 2011 Ford Focus that was listed for $3,500. This was a car that was well below market value, but it was in rough shape. We knew that the car would most likely need a new paint job and a deep interior cleaning, but we told ourselves that if we could get that car for $2,000, we would be able to walk away from that deal, invest some money into making the car better, and it would still be a below market value purchase. We test drove the car, it had a little bit more work than we anticipated, but we were still willing to buy it at that $2,000 price point. We ended up negotiating with the seller and they came down to $2,500, but they refused to come down to $2,000. And so HP and I walked away from the deal. Now, in the grand scheme of things, $500 for HP and I isn't much. And we absolutely could afford to buy this car for an extra $500. But it goes against how we purchase cars in the business model that we practice. We told ourselves ahead of time that we would not under any circumstances go above $2,000, and we weren't going to do that even though the seller offered $2,500. So we walked away from the deal. Knowing when to walk away and drawing that hard line in the sand is incredibly important, and it's a great way to hold yourself accountable to actually buying cars at a below market value price. Even if you find that car that looks as though it could be a solid purchase, if it isn't within your price range, then you need to walk. When it comes to buying cheap below market value cars, a lot of the times it really is just a numbers game. If you inquire with enough sellers and if you look at enough cars, you're eventually going to find one that's perfect for you. But the thing is, if you don't look for cars, you're never going to find one. I inquire, and I'm not exaggerating, with probably 20 to 30 sellers of vehicles every single day. If I see a car that's interesting, I will always message the seller. I send hundreds of different messages every single week to vehicle sellers, and many of these end up being unresponsive, they don't end up checking out, or they just aren't worth buying. But like I've mentioned throughout this video, you only need to find one that's worth purchasing, and it makes all of your time worth it. As you go through and you begin inquiring with sellers, you'll find that a large portion of them will simply never respond to you. Either they won't respond to your initial "is this available" message, or they'll never give you the VIN whenever you request it. But you'll find other sellers who are not only responsive, but they give you exactly what you're asking for in a timely manner. And following up with these sellers make it a much more manageable task to find that deal worth buying. So in general, my rule of thumb is inquire about everything and keep searching because you'll find a deal eventually. Another major factor whenever it comes to finding and negotiating deals, mainly negotiating more so than finding, is being an authority figure and having a level of confidence with your vehicle purchase. Whenever HP and I go to look at cars, we really act as though we know what we're doing. Because at this point, we kind of do, but that wasn't always the case. We always had a level of confidence with us whenever we would talk to sellers, inspect vehicles, and go in to negotiate. And I do feel as though this confidence does play a factor. Whenever we go to a seller and after the test drive, we'll oftentimes say, hey, we're interested in this car, but X, Y, and Z needs to be done to it. That's going to cost this amount of money. And because of that, we're willing to offer X amount of dollars. We have a level of confidence with this statement that oftentimes the seller doesn't really question it. And because of this, we're able to knock a few $100, if not $1,000 off of the purchase price. Instead, if we were to go to the seller and we were to say, hey, we think that this is wrong with the vehicle, it could cost this amount of money to fix, would you take this purchase price? That comes off a lot less confident and the seller is going to be less inclined to believe you and thus less inclined to move on the price point. Whenever you go in for a car deal, you're the expert. So act like it, have a sense of authority, and go in for the exact price point that you want in an extremely confident manner. Confidence goes a long way whenever it comes to negotiating, and again, I think you'd be surprised at how often sellers will come down simply because they feel like you know what you're talking about. This is especially true if it's somebody that's selling a car who doesn't know anything about cars, maintenance, or the car market. And last but not least, and this is something that I've talked about probably in dozens of videos over the years, is to be patient. I alluded to this earlier, but finding below market value deals really is the equivalent of finding a needle in a haystack. You have to sift through a lot of duds before you find a car that's worth buying. And while you guys that are watching this video never see the duds that I look through, I absolutely look through dozens of different ones every single day. So don't think that just because I'm buying multiple cars per month means that I'm only finding the cars worth buying. Because believe me, I find a lot of crap cars that I will never touch with a 10-foot pole. Patience is incredibly important whenever it comes to finding these great deals on cars. So I encourage you to just continue searching, continue inquiring, look at Facebook every single day, multiple times per day, and if you do this, you will find that below market value excellent deal. I almost guarantee it. But like always, you guys, I hope that you found this video helpful. I know that buying a car at a great price can be an extremely daunting task, but the reality is if you do what I've outlined in this video, I feel confidently that you can also find these amazing deals on some really solid cars. Like always, if you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to see it, so make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.